Hi everybody, this is an example of how you can get your habitat project started. It's just meant to be a guide. For those of you that are not in my class, you're not going to care about this video at all. At school you got a collection of art supplies, and in it was a packet of paper, and there was a Ziploc baggie and some cardboard and cardstock. See the previous video about how to create your quadrants, your pyramid display case here, and we're going to go through this together. The other things that you're going to need handy are your foldable for your habitat, your Arctic animal habitat, your Arctic animal adaptation, and your Arctic animal food cycle as well, because we're going to be modeling this inside of there. The packet has 2 pages in the beginning that are showing examples of what we're going to be putting into the pyramid, including a list of the things that you must have in that quadrant. You'll notice that there's one for habitat, there is one for adaptations, one for food cycle, and then there is another one that says human effects, and this is the human interaction that people have with either your Arctic animal or with the habitat itself. Because if any part of the habitat gets destroyed or is removed, the habitat becomes no longer livable for those animals or those plants, if you're talking about plant populations as well. The other 2 pieces of paper that are in the packet of paper are actually labels, and this is just a neat way for you to label the stuff that's in the pyramid so that it doesn't look like scribbled garbage. We want these things to look nice, and we want them to look neat, and we want them to be readable so that other people can enjoy them as well. I'm going to go through the different quadrants with you right now, and I'll be labeling on here. I'm going to be using pen. You should be using pencil to start, and then once you've got a good copy written out and make sure that the spelling is correct, then you can work on maybe tracing it with another pen or a marker if that looks neat. The habitat needs to have neatly underlined headings, a brief description under each heading, and then there's an optional part, include a brief write-up explaining the different parts of the habitat. And so for my Arctic habitat, I'm going to write water in the top section, and melting snow is one option for my particular animal. Your animal perhaps might be sea-based, and so ocean water would be where it gets its water from. Different sources for different animals, so make sure that you're looking in your Arctic habitat foldable to make sure that your information is going to be correct. And so I'm going to write melting snow underneath the water. So I've got the underlined heading, a description underneath, and then I can include a little bit of more information here. The example that I have in the example sheet says, as the snow melts, the Arctic fox is able to drink. And I think I'm going to include that information. I'm going to write that a little bit smaller than the melting snow. As the snow melts, the Arctic fox and is able to drink. I'm just going to say gets water. And don't want to squish it, still want to make it look neat. And so what I'm going to do then is I'm going to cut out this, you know what, I'm not going to cut it out just yet. I'm going to do the different parts of the habitat first. So water, I'll have food, I'll have shelter, and I'll have space. And remember, underneath each of those headings, I want to put a description of where exactly that is. This is my habitat section. I probably want to do my labels first so that I'll know how much room to leave for the different modeling that we're going to be doing in there. So the next one after that is going to be the adaptation. Now, if you take a look at this sheet, you're going to notice that there is behavioral adaptation and a physical adaptation box there. if that's too big and I don't want to make it as big as that, I can actually use these medium-sized boxes here instead. And in fact, I think I'm going to do that for my Arctic animal. And so I'm going to make sure that I have my label. This is going to be a behavioral adaptation. Oh no, I ran out of space. What you'll also notice is that I've given you extra boxes, 2 pages of them exactly. So if you make a mistake, don't worry about it. You should be using pencil, so you should be able to erase and maybe space it out a little bit better. Behavioral adaptation. And behavioral adaptation for the Arctic fox is going to be pouncing. And then the optional part is I can give a little description here as to how that is helpful. It can, the Arctic fox jumps in the air, and dives into hard snow. And why is that important? To catch its prey. And got my capitals, got my punctuation, and it makes sense and it fits. And so what I'm going to do next after this is I'm going to finish up my habitat labels. I'm going to include a physical adaptation as well, if there is one. And then what I'll do is I'll put those labels into my habitat quadrant and into my adaptation quadrant as well. Okay. The third section is going to be the food cycle. And for this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a bunch of different animals in there. And one thing that I would suggest you do is you're not going to be making large animals for each of these. I would suggest just stick with the head. Take a look at the example that we've got here. They've either got tiny little animals going around in a circle here, or they just have the largest animal at the back and then they go forward until they've received or eaten all of the things that are below them in the food chain. And use the smallest labels for those ones. And what you're going to do there is for the Arctic fox, one of its predators is the Arctic wolf. So I'll say Arctic wolf, and then just like you've done in the Arctic food cycle foldable, you're basically going to take each of those labels that they've got, and sorry, I had to take mine shut so it would stay shut. All you're going to do is take all the labels that you had for each one of those animals and just put them jot notes underneath. So the Arctic wolf was a predator, carnivore, third order consumer, and a scavenger. And then what I'll do is I'll cut that out, and then I'll be able to paste that either on the sides or underneath. I'm going to try to make it into a circle if I can around here, and then I'll make small little models of probably just their heads and then glue them into the appropriate spots. The one other thing that we'll need to do yet is the human effects, and I've actually got an example here. Pollution is one way that we hurt animals. And you can include that, or I would recommend that you go to Hinterland Who's Who website. It's hww.ca, and they actually talk about how the people living in the Arctic use animals in the Arctic in different ways. And so that would be one way that we impact animals, and sometimes it's beneficial, sometimes it's not. So that would be something that you could quickly take a look at. And same thing here. If you'll notice the example, there is no modeling in there. They just did illustrations and put them up, and I thought it was really cool. Make sure you read up top here what the instructions are for it. And so you can use just drawings. You can also do modeling with the plasticine that came with it. I've also included in the art kit different plasticines, white separate because it's going to get muddied up and dirtied if you touch other stuff. Make sure you wash your hands in between white and all the other colors. And if the white is a little bit hard, just work it with your fingers for a little bit, get some heat in there, and it'll become soft very quickly. You have different colored pieces of paper here. You can use those as backgrounds for different illustrations. You can use them as backgrounds for the labels. You can use them as, I think there's some blues in here. You can cut them into shapes and make little rivers for when you're doing your habitat section. You guys, I want you to be creative with this. Start with all your labels first. Do as many of those as you can. You will not need all of the different labels. Do not fill up the entire both sheets unless you're making mistakes like I am here. All right? So have some fun with it. Let's see what you guys come up with. You have until next week to get these things done. So as I'm working through the different labels, I got all of my food, water, shelter, space for habitat done. I also got my behavioral and physical adaptations done. As I was working on the food cycle, I noticed that there were 6 different possibilities in the food cycle, and I've already got all of those words that I need in 5. So I have the lichen is the producer, eaten by the lemming. The lemming is eaten by the Arctic fox, which also eats the lichen. And it also have an Arctic wolf that eats the Arctic fox. Now the Arctic fox and Arctic wolf are also scavengers, so I don't need to put a separate animal into there. I'm gonna have to do some thinking about how I'm gonna make that look. So I want to show you what a finished habitat project looks like. I've got the title up top there, The Arctic Fox by Wes. And then I'll just go through in order. This is my habitat section. I've got the sun over there labeled with the name of this quadrant right here. And then I've got water with the example for it, space with the example for it, food with the example for it, and then I even made a little guy right there with little tracks going through the snow. The water is just a piece of paper in the background. The space, there's just a little bit of a faint pencil line to show open fields, and I've got the shelter is his tail. And so if you take a close look, you can actually see I've put knife marks into there so it looks like fur on his tail. Let's not worry about his messed up eyes. Habitat, and then let's talk about adaptations is the second one. I've got my labels, behavioral adaptation, which is pouncing, and then an explanation of why it's important, and then whether that behavioral adaptation is instinctual or learned, and it is of course instinctual there. And I've also got a physical adaptation, and that's its fur, that it changes color, and that's an example of camouflage right there. I've got 2 pieces of plasticine laid down, and then I've scored them with a pencil so that it looks like fur again, and then I've labeled them as summer coat and winter coat. And that's a close-up example of the adaptations. Next, we've got the food cycle. We start with the sun and an arrow going down to the lichen, which is a producer, going down to the lemming, which is prey, herbivore, and first-order consumer, remembering to include all of the different labels from our food cycle, also called a food chain. Don't get confused by those. Just think of a bike chain, and it just goes around in a circle, right? I've got the Arctic fox with all of its labels, and then an arrow going to the Arctic wolf with its labels, arrow going up to the decomposer, which is the Arctic fungi, and going back to the lichen there. And that's my food cycle. The back of my sign just has the title and my name in it again. Spins nice. For the last section, which is humans, we want to talk about how humans hurt and or help their Arctic animal. And so the information that I got was that we do still hunt the Arctic fox for their fur. And here's a butchered fox on the ground. Yeah, I did it. I put blood into my project. And then the way that humans help this animal is we actually do less hunting now, because as new technology is invented, we hunt fewer and fewer Arctic foxes. And this is a completed habitat project.